So I'm here with Nigel Brennan, who has written a memoir called The Price of Life, which was published in June 2011. Nigel is a photographer and does say he's not a writer, but he has written this book, and it details the experiences he had in Somalia in captivity. So Nigel, welcome. Thank you for talking to me. Could you tell me a little bit about why you chose to write your story?
For me, the book was more a cathartic purpose. So probably a selfish reason in some respects, but during captivity, obviously went through 462 days of not allowing myself to feel any emotion because I was obviously terrified about having a mental breakdown. So coming home, I did a lot of work with a psychologist when I got back to where my parents lived, and she just suggested that I actually write something down for my own historical purpose. And then I thought about it and talked with my sister, who was heavily involved with getting me home, and my sister-in-law about the possibility of the three of us writing a book together. So certainly didn't write the book for monetary gain, because you don't make money out of books, or most authors don't make a lot of money out of writing a book, but for us it was about, I guess, giving people a greater idea of what all three of us went through as individuals and what our family had to go through from my kidnapping ordeal.
Okay. Could you maybe just summarise briefly what exactly happened and how you went to Mogadishu as a journalist, and you were taken quite soon, weren't you?
Yeah, so I had made plans to go to Somalia to, I guess, photograph the food crisis and the humanitarian crisis. Travelled with the Canadian freelance journalist, female Amanda Lindhout. We had planned to go for 7 days. On the fourth day, we were travelling outside of Mogadishu to one of the smallest internally displaced camps on the road to Afgoya, and about 5 kilometres outside of Mogadishu pulled up to what we thought was our extra security detail, and it ended up being an ambush and then held for the next 462 days. So for 13 months Amanda and I were separated from each other, for 11 months shackled in chains, both mentally tortured. Amanda was certainly physically tortured. And then finally released after my family paid a ransom of $658,000 for the two of us.
Your family raised that ransom themselves?
Family raised that ransom through aunties of mine who are incredibly generous, and they had a number of fundraisers that had to be done sort of undercover, so that it didn't sort of hit the media. One of the Australian politicians got involved, Senator Bob Brown from the Greens. He put in $100,000 of his own money, and then right at the end, Dick Smith and his wife Pip became involved because my family couldn't actually get the money all in the one place at the right time. They asked Dick if he would bankroll the ransom amount, and then he would be paid back as soon as we were released.
And were you aware of any of this as you were in captivity?
No, not at all. I had, I think through the entire ordeal, I took seven or 8 phone calls. 5 of those were to my family, a number were to journalists, and 2 phone calls to the Australian Federal Police. In regards to what was actually happening with negotiations, I had very little idea. Had very little idea of what was going on in the outside world. My only real link was the Somali BBC service, which I would get very short bits of information in English before it went into Somali translation.
So how did you stay hopeful during that time? Did you manage to do that? Or?
Yeah, it was such a roller coaster ride, and certainly at the start didn't have much hope at all. Was incredibly negative and, I guess, racked with guilt and shame, and suffered from depression. I'm incredibly grateful that I had Amanda there in captivity. She was a great support, and I guess in that early time. Even when we're separated, we managed to work together to sort of lift each other's spirits. But for me, I don't know. It's quite weird. I guess I was using survival skills that I didn't even know, setting routines, things like that, trying to befriend my captors. For me also, it was really important that I came home. I think had I not have come home, it would have had massive consequences on my family.
And in the process of writing the story then, it was obviously a family effort, putting the book together. And how did that work? How did you actually set about constructing the story of what happened?
So I guess it was me that sort of came up with the idea of wanting to write the book, and then asking my sister-in-law and my sister. My sister-in-law was 100% for the project. My sister actually said to me that she'd already spent 15 months of her life devoted on me. She didn't want to spend another 12 months writing a book, but managed to convince her. So we sat down, we wrote our own parts of the manuscript. We didn't actually read each other's work until after we had handed the manuscript over to Penguin. And then really fortunate to have two great editors work on the book with us. We handed them a massive manuscript, and then they probably peeled it back to a third of what we actually gave them.
Were there any things in the book that you wanted to fight for that were removed, or any particular bits that that you had to fight to have it in there?
Look, there were bits. There was obviously a lot of legality stuff as well, with naming people in the Australian government that we as a family obviously weren't happy about, and how they'd treated the family or reacted with the family. Certainly got an understanding from the editor, because there were so many people involved, obviously not just with the kidnappers but on the family side as well, and that was going to become confusing to the reader because there were so many characters in the book. So they explained why they'd taken people out, or why they'd taken pieces out of the book. So I guess in some respects you're led by your publisher as well, especially with the first book, because you expect them to have knowledge on how to sell books.
And since it's a memoir and it involves very painful material, how did you deal with that? How did you deal with did you stick to facts? Did you allow for emotion? Were your family resistant to any further exposure?
I think probably some members of my family weren't happy about a book, because I guess the book does sort of open my family completely up to the general public who read it. We wanted to be brutally honest with everything, so it was very factual. I guess each of us in our own ways had kept diaries and notes and stuff for the whole 15 months, so my sister had quite good research sort of stuff that she could go back on, as my sister-in-law and I kept a hidden diary for the last 11 months of captivity, which was great for me to have that sort of memory, to be able to go back and click my memory in.
Did Amanda contribute at all to the book?
No, she didn't. She, I think, is about to release her own book, so she's writing a book with an American woman on her account. I did ask her if, I suggested that we write a book together, but she said she wanted to write her own account. And I guess because we were separated for so long, we have two different stories, although very similar. What we went through, certainly different experience, so she'll tell her own side of the story.
And do you have much engagement with Somalia itself anymore, or was it just an incident that...
No, look, I've certainly, after coming home, have had engagement with the Somalian community in different parts of Australia. They were incredibly welcoming when I came home, putting on, I guess, dinners, which I was invited to meet especially the Somalian community in Brisbane, and it's touching, I guess, in a way, like the fact that they every single person in that room that night came up to me at one point and apologised for what had happened to myself and my family, and the fact that they were basically disgusted by the people that had taken us. So, in no way am I, even from my experience to my captors, I'm not filled with hatred for Somalia or Somalian people.
Is there any particular memory that you carry with you from your experience at all? Any one thing that sticks out?
Your memory's such a weird thing, I guess, and your memory does start to erase things, but I guess smell or sound can sort of bring something straight back. But look, there's not one sort of memory that I hold onto. There's things that I still, I guess, think about me teaching my young captors to do yoga, which seems absurd to have that sort of connection. To the brutalness of them screaming at me and pushing me down a hallway while I've got my ankles chained, or putting an AK-47 to my head. But I think 3 years on after the experience and being released, I've done a lot of work with psychologists, and I'm, I guess, trying to move on to the next part of my life.
And what would that be?
Look, I don't sort of plan too far in advance, to tell you the truth. I think that's one of, as my psychologist said, that's probably one of the downfalls of living in the moment for such a long period of time. But at the moment, training other journalists and working in crisis emergency management, still sort of play around with photography. So I was in Nepal a few months ago documenting an organisation that rescues Nepalese girls from Indian brothels. But long-term future, would love to get, will probably see myself back in Asia or Africa, hopefully working in some sort of aid position, not behind a desk writing reports. I prefer to be right at the coalface, sort of, if that means digging wells or building schools or that sort of stuff. I don't know. I think that's one of the things that I really got from my experience was, I guess, doing something for another human being, not for want of money, just to improve someone else's life.
Nigel, thank you very much for talking to me.
Absolute pleasure.